Good morning, everyone. Let me start with a simple truth. Blame is easy. Responsibility is hard. But if you want to grow, if you want real change, real leadership, and real impact, then we need to have an honest conversation today. Because pointing fingers won't get us any closer to the life we want to live, the culture we want to build, or the problems we want to solve. Let's talk about 5 truths that can change everything when we finally stop blaming other people. Blame feels good. It gives us a hit of emotional relief, a brief escape from the sting of failure, of discomfort, of not being where we thought we'd be. It's the emotional equivalent of a sugar rush. Immediate, satisfying, and completely empty. The moment something breaks down, whether it's a relationship, a project, a goal unmet, our first impulse is to deflect. It's his fault. They didn't do their part. If she hadn't made that decision, everything would be fine. And in that moment, we believe it. We convince ourselves that pointing the finger is not only justified, but necessary. We think we're protecting ourselves, preserving our identity, our self-worth. But here's the truth. Every time we point the finger, we surrender our power. We trade control for comfort. And comfort, when it comes at the expense of growth, becomes a trap. Think about a team working on a high-stakes project, deadlines are missed, the results fall flat, tension rises. The first voice speaks up. The manager didn't give us clear instructions. Another says, well, the tools were outdated. Another chimes in, we didn't have enough time. Each voice builds a wall of excuses, a fortress of reasons, but no one learns. No one takes a deeper look. No one asks, what could I have done differently? And so the cycle repeats. The next project arrives, the same behaviors unfold, the same frustrations surface, and everyone wonders why nothing ever changes. This is the cost of blame, stagnation. It freezes growth, paralyzes progress, and breeds resentment. And worse, it becomes contagious. In a culture of blame, nobody feels safe enough to take responsibility. Because when you live in a blame culture, taking ownership feels like volunteering to be the scapegoat. It feels like walking into the firing line. But real strength, real leadership begins with a different question. What part of this can I own? Not whose fault is this, but where was I in all of this? That question transforms everything. It shifts the spotlight inward, not to punish, but to empower. Because when you identify what part you played, you unlock your ability to do something about it. That's the power of responsibility. It puts you back in the driver's seat. You may not control every variable, but you control your reaction, your decision, your contribution. Let's go deeper. Imagine a marriage in crisis. Arguments every week, communication broken. One partner says, if only he listened better. The other says, if only she respected my time. The more they focus on what the other person isn't doing, the less they notice what they themselves are bringing or failing to bring into the relationship. But something magical happens when one partner decides to stop blaming and start owning. Maybe I haven't made space to really understand his stress. Maybe I've been reacting defensively instead of listening openly. That shift changes the energy. It invites healing. It creates space for the other person to reflect too. And suddenly, what felt like a dead end starts to feel like a way forward. This doesn't mean we excuse bad behavior. It doesn't mean we take on guilt that doesn't belong to us. Responsibility isn't about taking blame. It's about reclaiming agency. You can't change others, but you can influence them. And the most powerful influence begins with example. When you own your role, others feel safer to own theirs. This principle applies not just in relationships, but in organizations, in communities, in nations. We live in a time where outrage is easy and accountability is rare. Social media has taught us to react instantly, to condemn publicly, to deflect constantly. But the more we shout about what others are doing wrong, the less time we spend reflecting on what we might do right. And that is where progress dies, not in evil intent, but in the absence of ownership. In high-performing teams, there is a subtle but powerful norm. Accountability is embraced, not avoided. A team member misses a deadline. They don't hide, they step up. That's on me. I miscalculated the workload. And instead of judgment, they're met with support. Why? Because accountability breeds trust. It creates a culture where people know they won't be punished for being honest. And in that culture, people don't just perform, they grow. Now contrast that with a team where blame is the default. People cover their tracks. They play politics. They hide mistakes. Innovation dies. Creativity suffocates. And worst of all, everyone becomes focused on survival instead of service. That's the hidden cost of blame. It turns teams into silos, leaders into dictators, and relationships into war zones. But there is another way. It starts with a pause. The next time something goes wrong, before reacting, stop. Ask yourself, what is mine to own here? Even if it's just 10%. Own that 10%. Fully speak it, act on it, learn from it. Because that small piece you own is the doorway to change. Take the story of a small tech startup that nearly folded after a product launch failed. The founder stood in front of her team the next day, not with accusations, but with a mirror. I made a mistake. I rushed the timeline. I didn't ask for enough feedback. The room was silent, and then something extraordinary happened. Her head of design said, I should have spoken up. I knew the user experience wasn't ready. And then the marketing lead said, I didn't raise concerns about the positioning. I just went along. One by one, the team opened up, not to shame, but to share. Not to point fingers, but to build trust. That moment didn't save the product, but it saved the team. And 6 months later, they launched something better, something they built together, with honesty and ownership at the core. The truth is, we all have a choice in every situation. We can blame or we can build. Blame gives us a moment of relief. Building gives us a future. One keeps us stuck, the other moves us forward. And what makes the difference isn't the circumstances we face, but the courage we bring to them. So the next time you feel the urge to say, if only they had, pause, look in the mirror, ask the harder question. Not because you're the problem, but because you might just be the solution. The kind of solution that starts a ripple effect at work, at home, in your community. Responsibility, when modeled with humility and clarity, is contagious. It inspires others to rise, to show up, to lean in. And together, that's how we create something that actually works, not just for now, but for what's next. Blame is easy. It's the path of least resistance, a shield we raise to protect ourselves from discomfort, criticism, or failure. In the moment, it feels like relief, like control. But that relief is fleeting, and the cost of that control is trust. And once trust is gone, everything else falls apart. The very foundation of our relationships, whether at work, at home, or within ourselves, begins to erode. I once worked with a startup, high energy, big vision, the kind of place where people believed they were building something meaningful. But something was off. Despite the talent and passion, results lagged. And every time that happened, the leadership team had the same reflex: blame the marketing department. Didn't hit the quarterly numbers? Marketing's fault. Customer engagement low? Must be marketing. It became a pattern so predictable it was almost rehearsed. And here's what happened. Over time, the marketing team shrank, not in number, but in spirit. The bold voices went quiet, ideas dried up. People stopped raising their hands in meetings. They stopped challenging assumptions. They did only what was asked of them and no more. Because why give more if more only gets you blamed when things go wrong? Why speak up if your voice becomes the first one sacrificed? Blame breaks trust. It doesn't just bruise it or chip away at it, it breaks it. And when trust breaks, people retreat, innovation stops, engagement dies, potential gets buried under silence and self-protection. And it's not just startups or businesses, it's in our relationships too. How many of us have been in a friendship, a partnership, a marriage, where one person becomes the villain every time things get hard? You never listen. You always do this. It's because of you that we're here. Those words might seem like truth in the heat of an argument, but they land like poison. Not because they're harsh, but because they're rooted in blame, not accountability. And the difference is subtle, but the impact is profound. Blame says, you're the problem. Accountability says, I'm part of the solution. One pushes away, the other draws near. One isolates, the other connects. You cannot build anything meaningful, anything lasting in a culture of blame. Not a company, not a team, not a marriage, because blame makes people feel unsafe, and no one grows where they don't feel safe. Trust, on the other hand, is built in the moments when we take ownership. When we choose to say, I got that wrong, that was on me. Here's what I'm going to do to make it better. These words don't weaken our position. They strengthen it. They invite others in. They say, you matter enough to me. that I'm willing to be wrong in front of you. Think about the leaders you've respected most in your life, the mentors who shaped you, the people who inspired you. Were they perfect? Of course not. But I bet they were real. I bet they owned their mistakes. I bet they apologized when they needed to and followed it up with action. That's what made them great. Not their titles, not their achievements, but their willingness to be accountable. Because accountability is an act of courage. It's standing in front of your team, your family, your friends, and saying, I didn't get it right. That takes humility. That takes strength. It's far easier to shift blame, to deflect, to point fingers. But easy doesn't build trust. Easy doesn't. And when we stop blaming, something powerful happens. People begin to feel safe. Safe to speak up. Safe to try. Safe to fail. And in that space of safety, creativity thrives, ideas flourish, relationships deepen. And let me tell you a different story. A team I worked with years later, a different company, different culture. One quarter, they missed their targets by a wide margin. The CEO called a company-wide meeting. Everyone braced themselves for the blame game, but instead she stood in front of the entire company and said, this one's on me. I set unrealistic expectations. I missed some early signs and I didn't ask the right questions. Here's what I've learned. Here's what I'll do differently next time. And I'd love to hear from all of you, what can we learn together? The mood shifted instantly. Shoulders relaxed, people leaned in, not because the numbers changed, but because the tone did. That one act of accountability opened the door for honesty, for collaboration, for renewed commitment. That team went on to hit record highs the following year, not because they had better tools or strategies, but because they trusted one another, and that trust started at the top. That's the power of taking responsibility. It creates a ripple effect. It tells others, you don't have to be perfect here, you just have to be real. It gives people permission to be human. And when people are allowed to be human, they bring their whole selves to the table, their ideas, their passion, their brilliance. Blame is small, it's reactive, it's fearful, but responsibility is expansive, it's proactive, it's brave. So the next time something goes wrong, and it will, ask yourself, am I building trust or breaking it? Am I pointing fingers or extending hands? Because every time we choose ownership over blame, we build something stronger, something deeper, something that lasts. And if we want to lead, not just manage, not just survive, but truly lead in our work and in our lives, it starts with one simple, powerful decision: take responsibility. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because that's where trust lives. And where there's trust, anything is possible. When you stop blaming others, something powerful happens. You start evolving. It's as if a weight is lifted, not the weight of guilt, but the weight of helplessness. The blame is easy. It feels good in the moment because it lets us off the hook. But it's a hollow kind of relief, a temporary anesthesia that masks the real opportunity. The truth is, blame keeps us stuck. It locks the doors to growth, while responsibility holds the key. Think about the best leaders you've ever met. They're not flawless. They make mistakes, but they do something most people avoid. They own them. They don't waste energy pointing fingers or rewriting history to make themselves look better. They look inward. They ask, what could I have done differently? They take responsibility not because they enjoy the pain of failure, but because they understand the power it gives them to change, to lead, and to grow. I once heard a story about a team leader in a high-stakes project. The team missed a critical deadline. The CEO asked who dropped the ball, and instead of naming a person or blaming a department, the leader said, it's on me. That moment changed everything, not because the leader was wrong, but because he was brave enough to step forward when most people stepped back. The team respected him more, not less, and you better believe they didn't miss the next deadline. There's a principle that Navy SEALs teach called extreme ownership. It means that no matter the situation, even when the fault clearly lies with someone else, you take full responsibility for the outcome. Not to become a martyr, not to absorb blame, but because when you own it, you can change it. That kind of responsibility doesn't weigh you down, it lifts you up. When you embrace responsibility, you reclaim agency. You stop reacting to life and start shaping it. You stop waiting for others to fix things and realize you are the one you've been waiting for. There's nothing more powerful than that moment when you stop saying, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what can I learn from this? Responsibility isn't a burden, it's a catalyst. It turns pain into progress. It transforms failure into feedback. It's not always fair, but fairness isn't the goal. Growth is. And growth only happens when we choose to take the wheel instead of sitting in the passenger seat, hoping someone else drives better next time. You can't change what you refuse to claim. You can't grow from what you won't face. But the moment you say, this is mine, the game changes. You rise, you learn, you lead, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Because that's how transformation begins, not in blaming the world, but in owning your place in it. Blame is a habit, so is responsibility. And just like any other habit, the one you feed is the one that grows. Most of us don't even notice when blame becomes our default response. It slips out of our mouths in tiny moments. It wasn't my fault, they dropped the ball. If only they had done their part. It feels harmless, it even feels fair. But over time, these tiny moments build into a mindset that keeps us stuck. It makes us victims in our own story. And once we start believing that we're not in control, we stop trying to grow. Because why bother improving if everything is always someone else's fault? But responsibility, real, grounded, human responsibility, is also a habit. And it's one we can cultivate. It doesn't take grand gestures or sweeping changes. It starts in the small spaces of our daily lives. When a delivery is late, when a colleague misunderstands, when a project fails to meet expectations, pause, breathe, ask yourself, what part did I play in this? That question is uncomfortable. It demands honesty. It strips away ego, but it also gives you something blame never can: power. The power to learn, the power to adjust, the power to lead. This isn't about beating yourself up. Responsibility isn't shame. It's not about making yourself the villain in every story. It's about owning the role you play without excuses, without defensiveness, because when you do, you build trust with yourself first and then with others. People can feel it. They see the difference between someone who deflects and someone who reflects. One pushes people away, the other brings people closer. Over time, this habit transforms you. You become the kind of person others want to follow, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. You make space for growth, for accountability, for vulnerability. And that space is contagious. Teams start to mirror it. Cultures begin to shift. Leaders stop hiding behind blame and start standing up with responsibility. That's when change really begins. Imagine the ripple effect. One person who refuses to blame, who chooses instead to respond with clarity, curiosity, and courage, can change an entire room. That's the power of a single pause, a single choice, a single habit practiced daily. We are all shaping our environments whether we realize it or not. The question is, what kind of environment are you building? One that protects egos and masks insecurity, or one that invites growth, trust, and strength? Blame feels easy, but it builds walls. Responsibility feels hard, but it builds bridges. And in a world where connection, trust, and impact matter more than ever, the choice between the two isn't just personal, it's profound. Choose the habit that creates a future worth showing up for. Every single time. Let's face it, blame feels good. It gives us a momentary escape from discomfort, from guilt, from fear. It allows us to point the finger and say, it's not my fault. And for a few seconds, we feel lighter. But what we don't realize is that every time we do that, we trade our future for temporary relief. We give away our power. We stay stuck in a loop where nothing changes. Because nothing can change until we do. And that's the hard truth. We want our future to look different. We have to take ownership of it. No one's coming to rescue us. No one's going to hand us the life we dream about. That's our job. There's something deeply human about wanting to protect ourselves. But when that instinct becomes a habit, when it turns into a constant game of deflection, we rob ourselves of the growth that responsibility brings. Think of any breakthrough moment in your life. Was it born from blame? Or did it come the moment you looked in the mirror and decided to take charge even when it hurt? The better version of you, the one that's bold enough to build, not blame, already knows the answer. In business, teams that thrive are not the ones where everything goes smoothly. They're the ones where people take ownership. A Gallup study showed that accountability leads to a 21% increase in productivity. That's not magic. That's what happens when people stop waiting for someone else to fix the problem. They roll up their sleeves, they build trust, they make things better. And that same principle applies to your personal life too. Imagine your relationships, your career, your goals transforming, not because the world changed, but because you did. Every moment you spend blaming someone else is a moment you're not building the life you want. What if instead you asked, what can I do differently next time? What if instead of waiting for someone to apologize, you moved forward and let go? That's not weakness. That's strength. That's choosing peace over ego. That's choosing progress over pain. And here's the most liberating part. When you take responsibility, you stop being a victim of circumstance. You become the author of your story. You don't get to rewrite the past, but you do get to decide what happens next. You get to choose the kind of person you want to be, the kind of future you want to live in, and the kind of impact you want to leave behind. Blame might offer comfort, but responsibility offers freedom. The kind of freedom that lets you move forward with clarity, with courage, and with conviction. Your future is waiting, but it won't wait forever. Step into it, own it, build it. Because no one else can do it for you. And deep down, you already know you were born for this. Blame is a wall. Responsibility is a bridge. So the question is, what do you want to build? Let's be the kind of people who build bridges. Thank you.